Hey there, Colin Marshall here, host of the Marketplace of Ideas. Just letting you know that on our website, colinmarshallradio.com, there is another podcast in which you may well be interested. It's called Barely Literate. It is bi-weekly book discussions about all kinds of books by authors like Matt Ruff, Nicholson Baker, Neil Stevenson, Douglas Copeland, Hunter S. Thompson, and Douglas Adams. Find out more at colinmarshallradio.com. This week on the Marketplace of Ideas, a conversation with Thomas Lopez, founder and president of the ZBS Foundation, the foremost producer of radio fiction in the United States.
I don't even know you.
Take me home, Jack.
But you know who I am.
Please.
Well, where is your home?
You know.
Brazil?
Look at me.
Your eyes are so clear, like glass. Cool, like crystal.
What do you see?
I see myself reflected in your eyes.
Take me home, Jack.
I do know you. But it's as though I know you from a dream. Is that true?
You love the jungle, Jack.
Jungle Jack? How do you know that? Huh?
Don't you know me?
No.
Don't be frightened.
Well, who's frightened?
I can do things. I can become things.
Well, sure you can.
I'm going to show you who I am.
Great, fine.
I'm going to remove that which is not me.
Well, go ahead, fine.
My veil. My hat. My hair.
Hey, wait.
My ears. My nose.
Good Lord.
My eyes.
Wait, stop. Oh, my God.
My lips.
Stop.
And my skin.
Look at me.
No.
Look at me, Jack.
I can't. Oh, your face. My God. A skull. A clear crystal skull.
Take me home.
Who are you?
Your salade maison?
Huh?
You ordered the coq au vin?
It's the Marketplace of Ideas. I'm Colin Marshall. Thomas Lopez is the president of the ZBS Foundation, the foremost producer of, depending on what you prefer to call it, radio drama, audio theater, or audio drama. Tom, welcome to the program.
Hey, nice to be on it.
Now, I listed off those terms. What do you prefer? I mean, maybe there's one that I haven't thought of.
I was at a conference in Europe, in the European Radio Drama Conference, and they decided to change the name. I don't know if they actually did. This was a year ago, to audio drama, because it exists on so many different platforms other than just radio. So, and that seemed like a good. In this country, they generally would call it audio theater, but it was interesting to hear the Europeans' take on it. Is that theater seems to have a sort of connotation of, theater, as opposed to drama, which is more general. And I always liked radio fiction, frankly. But
Radio fiction, that's one I've not heard before.
Yeah, I for some reason prefer that, simply because it distinguishes it in terms of public radio, particularly, has gone so, and not in a bad way. I don't mean, in terms of news and information, and fewer fiction, radio stories.
Right.
And what they call radio stories are really documentaries. They call that storytelling, which is fair enough, but it's not the type of storytelling that I do.
I do wonder why the bent has turned so strongly toward well-told nonfiction when fiction could be told equally well in just about the same way on radio.
Well, yeah, definitely. That's why I did a series called 2-Minute Film Noir. And the object was because I felt that radio drama could exist with documentaries. There was no reason not to. And so it was well-produced little noir-type stories, self-contained, running about 2 to 3 minutes. And at the time, NPR's Day-to-Day, which was a midday magazine show, would play some of these right in with the documentaries and news that they were doing, and it worked perfectly fine, as I thought it would. And then, of course, NPR in March discontinued the series, so that is the series Day-to-Day. So at least I was proven right that if a station will give it a chance, particularly the short pieces, can work very well with the existing documentaries.
And a day-to-day listener, or, a former now day-to-day listener, and I know a few of them, more than a few, will have heard then examples of radio fiction. And at the beginning of this interview, before the interview proper, at the beginning of the program, the audience heard a scrap of radio fiction themselves, a clip from a ZBS production called Dreams of the Amazon, starring, I would guess, what I'd call the primary protagonist of ZBS. We'll call him Jack Flanders. And that was actually the first ZBS thing I ever heard. You can tell me, I'm pretty sure my story is fairly typical for many a ZBS listener. Is back in, I believe the year was 93, I was just a kid and I was kind of browsing the library looking for CDs, and I found this Dreams of the Amazon thing that had very cool cover art, and I just picked it up on the basis of that alone, and I popped it in, and it was like nothing I had ever heard before. If it was some kind of audiobook, I wouldn't have been surprised, but it's this full cast production with this lush production to the sound of it. Is that a fairly common way for people to find ZBS?
We do get responses from, what's particularly amusing is our young kids that, I call them kids, but that have never heard radio drama, don't even know what it is, and pick it up thinking that it's an audiobook, meaning, that it's somebody reading a book, and then discover a full production and so on, and never really heard anything quite like it. Not that there aren't other things out there, they just aren't exposed to it. So, yeah, it does happen upon occasion.
The funny thing is that back then when I picked up Dreams of the Amazon and heard other ZBS stuff, that actually got me into old-time radio drama. I didn't even know, sort of, not the source material, but I didn't know there was a tradition of it until I sort of started at what was created in the present at that time and kind of moved back. So that was fun. But the character there, who is the star of that particular show, Jack Flanders, I always associate him as the main fictional entity when I think of ZBS. Who is he exactly?
We just started off in 1972 with the very first, which was the Fourth Tower of Inverness, and that featured Jack Flanders.
Yeah.
And that was actually sponsored by the Jefferson Airplane, or Jefferson Starship, as they were later called, and they actually paid us for the production. I mean, we did it, and we approached them. We were in the process of doing it, and we approached their public relations person, and he loved it. He says, "What can we do? How can we work together?" And so that's why they distributed it to, I think there's 170 or so, 270 college stations, because this pre-existed NPR, and so that we called them all college stations, and then of course later there were still some college stations and some community stations, and then what we call public radio now. So it was about 7 minutes a day, and then on the weekend there was also the half hour, so people could hear it as a daily continuing serial or catch on the weekend the full half hour.
I'm glad you've brought up the Fourth Tower, because I was re-listening to it not long ago and noticing, as we've talked about, the main character, Jack Flanders, who's been in ZBS productions for so long now, and how I was noticing how the character evolved. He was more of a standard protagonist, it seems to me, of radio fiction early on, but what has he developed into over time?
At the time, the Fourth Tower was really the intention was that it was a bridge from old-time radio, which really didn't exist anymore at that time. When I say didn't exist, there were stations playing repeats, but nothing had been done in years. And it really had in mind, it was kind of paying tribute to a series called I Love a Mystery, which was a wonderful daily series. It was about 15 minutes a day that existed back in, 40s, 50s, something like that. So it was kind of like paying tribute to it and then saying, okay, let's move on, let's evolve from here, because now the technology is such that you can go out with tape machines and gather your own sounds and do all kinds of things just with your own studio, as opposed to having to be part of NBC or ABC or ZBS or something like that. How he evolved was the actor, Robert Lorick, who was essentially saying, Jack's kind of, doesn't he ever learn anything from these experiences? I mean, shouldn't he be evolving somewhat? Because it seemed to me that all these things were constantly happening to him, and he thought that he should have some control over his life. And so the character kind of evolved by being pushed by the actor.
That's kind of the appeal of Jack Flanders, though, and for audience members who haven't heard it, this is a fellow who gets into all sorts of outlandish adventures because he seems to have the ability to not only exist in the world as we all know it, but he moves into these invisible realms where a lot more mystical things happen to him. Perhaps you can explain a little better what befalls Jack in his travels.
I think, part of it is my fascination with the spiritual and the mystical and exposure in life. My mother was quite psychic, and she could put curses on people. So,
oh my!
She had certain abilities, and so I began to recognize that there are interesting things going on. That is, other levels of reality that are really quite magical, and everyone has experienced all kinds of strange things. That is, coincidences that just don't. They're just too orchestrated, almost, in a sense. Encountering people that this sort of thing, just that chance doesn't quite explain it all. And also, too, of course, there's a great tradition in terms of literature. The Arabian Nights, for example, which was a gathering of stories from India and all over that go way back, and putting together as 101 nights of these wonderfully magical flying carpets and all of these things. And there's enough, what should I say, reality in a sense that can back up certain possibilities of, say, in terms of abilities by various shamans, the Native American as well as some of the yogis in India. And there's stories of people like Swami Yogananda, who was like the first really Indian Swami to come here, and his experiences of people that could be in more than one place at the same time, and so on. And one encounters different people in life that have had some strange experiences. So all of these things are things, not all of these things, but many of these things are things that get worked into the stories. And as well as there's a kind of Buddhist philosophy that's sort of woven within, because Eastern mysticism, there's more possibilities than our own more Christian traditions. That is for the imagination to run wild, so to speak. So the things that happen to Jack is he's just similar to myself. He's a lucky guy, and I consider myself pretty lucky too. And so it's really luck that gets him out of situations, but it's also his attitude. And there's like a little card, his business card, says, "What appears to be coming at you is coming from you," which is a way of saying that what happens in one's life is what one attracts to themselves. We've noticed, if you don't go into certain places that are really bad, negative, dark, or if you're attracted to that, you also are very likely going to experience some of the things that come with that, which is some people that can be a real problem in your life. But if you're more attracted to positive, more optimistic. That in itself helps create your life for you. So really the underlying message I've realized that over only these last few years is one of loving kindness. That seems to be what I find as the most important thing in life, and that is being kind to people. And you find out in return, all kinds of nice things happen to you. And it isn't like I'm doing this so that this will happen. It's more like this seems to be the sensible thing to do. It's taken me a long time to realize that, but nonetheless, it makes life quite interesting.
And Jack certainly has a lot of kindness to him. I mean, in so many of his adventures, he will go across the globe just to help somebody find a lost relative or something like that. And he does have a lot of good things happen to him. It seems to me he also has a lot of scary stuff happen to him. He's confronted by visions and internal and external experiences I would imagine most of us would be frightened by. But what I've always liked is he takes it all in stride. He doesn't seem to believe or disbelieve in what's happening to him. Does that make any sense at all?
Well, definitely. I mean, he definitely has more nerve than I do. But I do like the idea of traveling places, like going to the Amazon a couple of times and spending a week out there recording and just going to different countries with a tape machine and just finding myself in situations where I'm gathering sounds, and sometimes it's a little touchy, because more than once I've had guns pointed at me. In fact, it's happened several times. Just finding myself in the wrong place, but finding that, you just go limp and you say, tourist. And that's kind of a magic word that helps a lot, meaning stupid person, but not of any real threat.
No, I imagine this was a lot harder to do. I remember you saying some stuff about this in other interviews, but in the days when recording meant you had to carry a big Sony recorder over your shoulder and have a microphone that's 2 feet long, as opposed to today when, you can pretty much conceal it, right?
Right.
Did Jack become a world traveler because you were a world traveler? When he did, after the Fourth Tower, there was, of course, Moon over Morocco, and then he just went everywhere, the Amazon, Bali, Sumatra, Belize, it's getting harder and harder, we'll say, to find a place Jack hasn't been when I think about it. But did he become this because you wanted to be a traveler?
Yeah, well, what happened was I lived in Berkeley for about 6 years, and then I moved to London for a couple of years, and while I was there, someone asked me to hop down to Tangier and record the writer Paul Bowles and do an interview with Paul Bowles, which I did do. And when I was there in Tangier, I realized, I said, oh my gosh, there's some great sounds here. It's like a wonderfully rich place. The language and, of course, all the other, the call, prayer, and, and the Medina and the marketplace, so on and so forth. And we formed ZBS in 1970. Someone did give me the money to get back to Morocco and travel around and record, and I had already done the Fourth Tower of Inverness, so it seemed like a natural place to go and gather sounds. And in the process of traveling and recording, just randomly, whatever sounded interesting, I started taking notes for the story. And then when I got back, I listening to the sounds and everything, and decided that I would write the sounds in that I liked. And so it was like using sounds like one would an interesting character. So it didn't have to say, oh, here we are, blah, blah, blah. People could hear it. People would know because they have enough references, either from seeing movies or whatever, that you could just get on with the story and not have to spend time describing what's going on around you. That experience then triggered the possibility of going other places, to Bali, Sumatra, Java, and then of course South and Central America, and doing a little research ahead of time. But wherever I thought there would be interesting sounds, and the stories always were written after the fact. That is, gathering the sounds first, which is quite different than the way you normally do it. You write a story, and then you look for sound effects, or you go, create your own. So it was like painting with sound, and it was a fun fun experience.
That's a method I find so fascinating. Tell me how accurate it would be to frame it like this, to say that in a way you're gathering sound and arranging it together like music, and the dialogue is, you might say, the lyrics to it. I don't know, is that too far out?
No, that's really, because you think in terms of textures and colors and even smells to some extent, even though that doesn't come through on radio very well. In a sense, it's like a filmmaker going out and finding interesting places to shoot a film, visually interesting places. And this is doing a similar thing only with sound, but finding places that are sound interesting, and that they hopefully create also a visual picture in the listener's mind.
Now, before this interview, as I said, the audience heard a clip from Jack Flanders in Dreams of the Amazon. It's a fairly rich one, I think, although that story is at this point, correct me if I'm wrong, about 17 years old?
Yeah.
Around there,
yeah.
92? But it sounds great still, of course, but what sort of sound stuff is going on in any given scene? I mean, in that one we heard a restaurant in the background, some ambient piano music. We heard the Jack talking. We heard a waiter. We heard the skull in the guise of a woman sitting down and removing layers to reveal the skull. And we heard a voice that sounded electronically treated. How many sound things are going on in a Jack Flanders scene like that? It doesn't have to be that one, but how many individual components come together to make these?
It really varies tremendously. I think in terms of ambiance, the environment, and the sound effects. And to me, sound effects are wine being poured, glasses being set, cigarette being lit, that sort of thing. Footsteps. And then, of course, the background would be the crowd and so on. Now, in that case, there are probably so darn many levels, because sometimes, I can't remember specifically for that, but sometimes I'll do a crowd that will actually have three different crowds. And one will be a cafe, which I've used this over and over, a little coffee shop, actually, in Tangier that I recorded. And so the voices, no one's speaking English. So usually it's French and Arabic that's being spoken, but you can't really make it out. It's what they call crowd walla. But it's fairly close. It's recorded fairly close. And sometimes I'll use a middle range that for more of the middle of the room, depending on the size of the room. And then sometimes I'll use, for the back of the room, a very live kind of sound, of which someone I know recorded in Tunisia, in a hotel in Tunisia. And you can get a depth of meaning that it's then possible to move into the room and have it change. And you can get these layering that no one would know. Everybody would think, oh, this is a room that was recorded somewhere. But actually it's made up of several different, totally unrelated places, but sound-wise they change. And from a dry sound, a close sound, and like somebody in the table just, your elbow away that's talking, and then you would hear somebody else who's further into the middle of the room, and then somebody in the far room, because of the liveness of it or something, or the reflectiveness of it, they would sound quite different. And then adding, in terms of the Dreams of the Amazon that you're referring to here, all the sound effects, I think I made them all, and they were, using various bell peppers and ripping them apart, and probably carrots and all kinds of vegetables.
Wow,
or her removing parts of her face.
I did wonder about that. I shouldn't have neglected to directly ask. Yeah, with the removal of the skin, that was particularly vivid.
Well,
I remember.
I think I stole that idea, which was, his name was Arch Obler, who did a piece for radio way back. He was a great thriller writer, or horror writer, and it was somebody who's turning inside out.
Uh-huh.
His body is like turning inside out, and he did it with a wet rubber glove. And I think that's what I used for her pulling her skin off.
Oh, I see. Wow.
I used that idea.
Well, I never would have guessed that. I also never would have guessed there were quite so many layers. I mean, I work with audio myself, but of course, simple stuff, interviews. It's never something so many layered as that room with several different tiers of sound to it. It's always just two people talking. So I'm of course very impressed by that, and I wonder how easy was this, or I imagine it was very, very difficult to do this at the outset in the early 70s. I mean, what did the technology allow? In the early 90s, when Dreams of the Amazon was out, obviously you could do more than I thought. But 20 years before, what was it like to have to work with this?
If you read recording engineers that have been around for a long time, and you'll hear them rumbling about how easy the kids have it today, meaning they can just dial up everything, and how they had to work with tape machines and so on, and limited of tracks. And it was kind of, I'm not complaining about how easy it is by comparison, but it was fun in some ways. Is more, it's certainly more challenging. For example, Moon of Morocco, we had a 4-track machine, and I mean, I listened to some of the things we did, and I cannot figure out how the heck we did it. But what we had was several other tape machines, these old Ampexes, the floor models, 2-track, okay, and we would line them all up and get them all going at the same time.
Oh,
and
wow.
So we would have layers in terms of Moon of Morocco of crowds and all kinds of things going on. And at the time, Bob Bilecki, who was our engineer, and he went on to later work for years with the performance artist Laurie Anderson. And Bobby could get these things like with one shot. He could mix it like 15 minutes nonstop, and because you couldn't stop the machines. That's Moon of Morocco came out. I think it was like 12 minutes a day, something like that. You couldn't stop it because wherever you would make the edit, the machines would never be coordinated, and plus you'd have to get back and cue everything back up again. As I said, I listened to it today, and I said, I cannot believe we did this with a 4-track.
It reminds me of a story that I was actually going to ask you if it's, or how true it is, but I remember reading about ZBS that at one time some people from the New York State Arts Council came in to maybe see if they could give you a grant, and they heard Moon over Morocco, and they said, well, this obviously isn't capital A art. And I'm thinking to myself, how could something that requires that much work not be art,
People have in their minds what art is, and it's never been easy with the New York State Council on the Arts. I gave up on them a long, long time ago. They had the National Endowment for the Arts was much more open and receptive in terms of they recognized radio art, okay, and but the National New York State Council, it was they had their own vision.
When somebody hears a ZBS show and maybe has that same kind of confused reaction, I wonder what they're reacting to. I mean, one of the things I find most fascinating and most fun about ZBS programs is that there's, in the original material at least, there's this pervasive humor to even some of the most, let's say, the direst situations that Jack Flanders gets into. There is a humor. Is humor a thing that people respond badly to when they go seeking art?
That's a good question. That's a maze I don't think I want to start wandering down into.
I see.
I'm not sure. I really, and plus it changes to the, we have new technology and internet and all of these other things going on, and so even the way people respond to what they consider art is, and what they don't consider art is, it really varies so much. I think I'll stay silent on this.
Probably a good move. The issues of what is and what is not art, I don't know if they can ever be resolved, but issues of humor now. Humor, I would guess, is extremely important to you, just judging by hearing ZBS shows. Am I right or wrong about that?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, for sure. Because in the fourth tower of Inverness, there are all these little bits of wisdom that were taken from Sufi sayings to Zen, and so on and so forth. Many, many little bits of wisdom that are like dynamite, little things. And at the time, I wanted to present it in a way that did just the opposite of laying it down. Because sometimes somebody will have some serious spiritual, little bit that they take from wherever, and they lay it down as something serious, like pay attention. This is good for you. And what we did was take it and throw it away. Meaning when you say to an actor, don't underline it, do just the opposite, just throw it away. Because these things are, some of these little bits were so potent. I'm trying to think of some of them. And also, too, we had little bits from Ram Dass, who's a spiritual leader, and used some of his things that were also put in something called the Wurlitzer of Wisdom. And his things really, he has a great sense of humor, and he presents many of these ancient spiritual insights with great humor too. And so it's important that if you want to get a message across to someone, to me, just do the opposite of like sticking their head into it. Instead, take it and throw it into the air and see if they want to, catch it or not. And so we would get letters from people saying, "Well, I don't know. I like the adventure. I don't know what these other things were being said, but I like the adventure." So the object was to have both. Actually say something, but keep the momentum going, keep the adventure going.
It is quite amusing. I wasn't around for the 1960s, and I talked to many people who weren't around for the 1960s and missed out firsthand on a lot of the culture of that time, who listen to ZBS and who hear remnants that they identify with what they know about 60s culture, Eastern wisdom, that sort of thing. And they always say, and it's what I said at first too, what ZBS Productions blessedly lack is an over-seriousness about it, because some of us have parents who were very serious about a lot of the things that a ZBS Jack Flanders show might try to get across lightly, and the seriousness kind of killed it for them. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah. It's all these people. I mean, today it's even worse. Back then, you could do it because, meaning that people were just then being exposed. Then meaning talking about the 60s. There wasn't much literature out there. If you wanted to read about Buddhism or something, there were very few things you could find, or any of the Eastern cultures that were other than just scholarly. But if you wanted to try to find something because you were hoping that maybe there's something there for me that I could actually, improve my life or the way I see things or something like that. So starting off, in the early 70s and being able to present that actually opened some fan letters. We've gotten a lot of fan letters that say, "You changed my life,"
Oh, wow.
Which I have mixed feelings about. I'm hoping it's for the better. But where it opened the eyes up to people as to something other than what they thought life was. That is, that there are other views of reality and the spiritual and the mystical world. Now, as I'm drifting away from it,
that's fine.
Give it back to me again.
The issue is about how young people, and I'm counting anybody as young who could not have firsthand lived through 60s culture or even early 70s culture, which gets called 60s culture nowadays, who hear ZBS shows and who hear all these elements that you've put into them that take this stuff lightly but not unseriously, and then they look at their parents' generation, many of whom remain all too serious about it, and serious in an unappealing way. So I was just asking how true is that? I suppose, do you hear back from young people who say, "Wow, this isn't how my parents put 60s stuff at all"?
Well, I really haven't gotten that, even though some of these things have spanned like 3 generations, meaning someone was like 6 years old when their parents were playing it, okay, like the Fourth Tower of Inverness. And now they're playing it for their kids.
Yeah.
So, which is amazing. But I've never, as far as I can recall, anyone pointing that out about the difference of, their parents being 60s people and taking seriously. I think that the seriousness, it was more searching back then, trying to see what there was and, what's possible. What seems to be what has evolved, in these last few years of where I get Buddhist magazines and different other, magazines, and you have all these people that talking about enlightenment that really have no idea, and and taking things rather seriously, and then of course there's a great tradition in terms of Zen and so on, of where you don't take or you think seriously in the way that thinking that, if I can understand it mentally, that then I'll be able to be it. And they realize that isn't it. Our mental facilities or faculties are so limited, and so there's really no reason to take any of it seriously, because that you'll never get anywhere if you're trying to get somewhere. That is, by taking anything seriously, because we see so little of what may actually exist. There was a Russian mystic by the name of Gurdjieff who said that if we could see reality as it really is, we'd go insane instantly. And I tend to think he probably has a good point, that these veils in front of our eyes, that they are lifted very slowly, if at all, and probably all for the best. That's why they say certain information, secret information, so to speak, whether this is true or not, I have no idea, that you just don't give it to people until they're ready to hear it. And that seems to be that there is a kind of a buffer that happens that we fortunately don't have our minds blown by things that we really aren't ready to accept. I'm guessing here. I have no idea if that's true or not.
If you're just tuning in, this is the Marketplace of Ideas from Colin Marshall Radio. At our website, colinmarshallradio.com, you'll find our complete interview archive as well as other podcasts and more. My guest is Thomas Lopez, founder and president of the ZBS Foundation, America's foremost producer of radio fiction. Here's an excerpt from an earlier ZBS production, the first of many adventures of Ruby, the Galactic Gumshoe.
The crystal city glistens in the moonlight. 3 of the 6 moons of Suma Nula are shining down, casting weird shadows in this abandoned city. Yeah, not totally abandoned. This was once an automated city. Now the rusted slidewalks no longer move. The winds blow through the broken city. What else? Whose thoughts? Oh, yeah. Slimies. Biogenetically engineered assassins out for the hunt. I can feel their mind nets sweeping the city. Okay, mind webs. Spun from cool, slimy thoughts that drift out to touch and freeze you in your tracks. So they can step up and blast you away. I move silently. I feel the mind webs searching, sifting, trying to pick up human thoughts. In the faint light of the 3 half moons, I see someone moving across the square. Wait a second. That looks like me. What the? They cut her down. Her circuits are oozing out of her stomach. She's not human. That's interesting. A Frankie that looks like me. Oh, she's still kicking. She's trying to get back up. Yeah, its scaly back is turned. I step out. I let it hear the sound of my blaster being set. It whirls and fires. I slow it down and slip aside. A beam scorches past my head. A chunk of the city flies into the sky. Slimy is surprised. It missed. It didn't know I can control time. I smile. Here's a kiss for you. My name is Ruby. I'm a galactic gumshoe. A good one.
Much of this is what I think of as an overarching ZBS sensibility. And in the Jack Flanders show, a lot of this comes through very loud and clear. Not to say too strongly, but loud and clear. And I'm now thinking of the other character who I most often associate with ZBS, Ruby the Galactic Gumshoe, and her adventures on the surface seem like they couldn't be more different from Jack Flanders. They're futuristic, they're even more fantastical, they're filled with invented sounds rather than collected ones. And how are Ruby's shows expressive of this ZBS sensibility, if indeed I'm accurate in saying there is one?
Well, I think part of it comes out of the wanting to do something quite different. Also, knowing an actress that I could write for, because I knew she had tough New Yorker, and also at the time, because very first Ruby, I think, was done maybe 77, something like that. And at the time, there wasn't many models out there, hardly existed at all, of women that could stand on their own, and in terms of media, and in terms of fiction storytelling that existed in the popular media, television, radio. So I really wanted to present a woman that didn't need to lean on a guy or something like that, because that was usually the case, that they were ingenues, and somebody who had certain abilities of her own and just didn't take BS from anybody, and she could whip somebody if she had to, meaning that so she could be as sassy as she wanted to be, and wisecracking and everything else, and I knew the perfect actress to do that. So it was fun to get away from Jack, who's much more insightful and so on, and work with somebody who's much more action and doesn't really think that much about the consequences of doing something. She just does it because she knows that one way or another she can slip out of whatever the situation is.
And Jack and Ruby have now evolved into the kind of twin icons of
Right.
ZBS. And it must be the case that I'm thinking about just how we were talking about production earlier. They must be completely different in terms of how you make them, because you can't exactly record Morocco to make a Ruby show, can you?
No, it is a little frustrating because I can't go and record the future, and so I have to. In that case, I rely much more on the music of Tim Clark, who I've worked with for many years. And Tim was a composer, and actually, I think he was the first one called composer in residence at a planetarium, and back in the 70s in Toronto, the McLaughlin Planetarium. So Tim learned early on how to create music. He was doing New Age music way the heck back, what we call New Age music, space music, to back these planetarium shows. And he learned how to record rather elaborate music behind a spoken voice, which is totally different than someone singing, because the frequencies that you have to deal with is mid-range frequencies. Tim could actually create music that was really quite loud to a speaking voice, and he sometimes would put a filter in, and he'd filter out those mid-range frequencies where our voice is out of the music, and that way he'd be pushing up the others, and it wouldn't cover the music. A lot of composers or musicians, I should say, don't understand that it's not easy to do music that's, say, hot against the spoken voice. You can do backgrounds, but I didn't want backgrounds. Like with Ruby, the music I wrote, they were 3 minutes a day, and I wrote it with the idea that it was, each one was like a little piece of music, because music, generally speaking, on the radio was about 3 minutes in length. And the object was that the music would be every bit as important as the action and the voices. So not knowing what the heck the music would be, but we worked it out together, and it was a lot of fun. And so they're much more like, and I learned to write differently because Tim said, over this 3-minute thing, Tim would say, well, okay, where's the change? And I'd say, what? The what? And he says, well, the music can't just be stay the same for 3 minutes. You got to have a change, like maybe every minute or something. And so I say, oh, okay, well, here we can make a change here and make a change here. And then I started to write in terms of scenes. So the scenes would change after maybe a minute or so. So then the music could shift into, change into something else. I send him the rough mixes, and he does the music right directly with rough meaning it'll have sound effects and it'll be, roughly mixed. And then in environments and everything. And then with that, then he knows, he can compose the music right to the piece. And so sometimes he can subtly underline a word or make a change in a way that's rather subtle, but yet dramatically it's affecting things on a sort of subconscious level as music. It's very powerful stuff, as we know. So I think very, closely when I'm writing, I let it, instead of people talking all the time, then there's no place for music. Then the music is like background, right? So when you write, let it breathe so the music can come through.
Tim Clark's music is one of those elements that I just can't imagine ZBS shows without. And yes, as you describe the production process for Ruby, the interweaving of the words and the music, really the Ruby stuff that I've heard, and tell me if this is going a little too far, but it sounds a lot like musically scored poetry almost when the end product comes out. Well,
yeah. I think that's probably what we're attempting and rarely achieved. But that is the idea that that you have. That it is depending on the length. Some of these are half an hour in length. One story. Other Rubies, that sort of thing. And so I think of it more as a kind of a complete piece, not necessarily an orchestrated piece, but sort of similar. And Tim, I'll send him notes on what not in terms of what the music should be, just notes so he understands some of what's going on in case, not being clear about it. But he's the one that really comes up with things. And so he's the one who, it's kind of like, maybe a cartoonist or something. First you have the writer, and then you have the people drawing it, and then you have somebody filling in the color.
It's the Marketplace of Ideas. I'm Colin Marshall. My guest is Thomas Lopez, founder and president of the ZBS Foundation. Now from ZBS, here's one entire episode of 2-Minute Film Noir.
She came from a place where people don't come from. That's because we're all trying to get there. She was the lady from Shangri-La. I figured she was nuts. Why leave paradise for a rat hole like this? Who do you think you are? Some kind of angel?
Yeah, you could put it that way.
But why this stinking city?
Looks like you can use an angel.
Are you an angel of mercy?
Maybe.
Or an avenging angel?
Depends. What's to avenge?
How can a single angel clean up a cesspool like this?
You never heard of the wrath of God?
You can bring that on.
I'll put in a request.
Don't. Things are bad enough.
Might make it better.
Look, sister, this is Scum Town. Go back to Shangri-La.
Maybe I like it here.
I'm telling you, this is a world of crime, murder, hard-boiled detectives, and ruthless criminals.
That's what I hear.
It's a world of violence, greed, lust, and high heels tapping on rain-slicked streets with reflecting neon signs.
So I've noticed.
It's totally corrupt and devoid of any human sympathy. It's a world where women with a past and men with no future spend eternal nights in one-room walk-ups, surrounded by sounds of shots and screams, sounds of sirens and sobs, of sighs and slaps, of kicks and groans.
Sounds bleak. Sounds black, but doesn't sound boring.
So, you're gonna stick around?
You could use an angel.
Yeah, maybe. Cigarette?
Why not? I may as well learn.
Inhale. Exhale through your nostrils. Slowly. so long to Shangri-La.
So long.
Now, we've gotten 50 minutes into this without mentioning much about the film noir stories that you've been doing more recently, the 4 minutes and the 2 minutes. And I like these especially because, from what I've heard about them, they're emblematic of what I find so fascinating about your creative process. Now, is it true that, without exception, you get the title made first and then you make these 2 minute and 4 minute film noir stories out of the title?
Oh, yeah, definitely. When I wanted to do the short pieces, I said, okay, I can come up with a few. First idea was what I want to do is series, and then how the heck to keep coming up with ideas for a series of maybe, 50 self-contained little stories. And I first chose something that I ended up calling 90-second cell phone chill on theater. And so that was all based on essentially Hollywood horror stories, vampires and werewolves and on and on and on, and zombies, but only with a humorous bent. And then it was easy to come up with titles that I thought were humorous. And then came the idea of doing, okay, let's do something that's a little longer than 90 seconds. We'll do something 2 minutes, and we'll call it 2 minute film noir. Was given a book of film noir posters, and so looking at these, I said, oh boy, I love this stuff because we've all been exposed to it, and the nice thing is you don't really. Everybody knows the gangsters, everybody knows the mob, the gun malls, the blah 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 blah. So it was easy to have all these essentially cliched characters, and you don't, with just a few words, somebody is snapped right into knowing something about them. A character called Rico, is a gangster, okay, and he talks, with a funny voice, and everybody has been exposed to that in some way or another in terms of television and film and so on. But to come up with all these ideas, I needed to have themes for each of these stories, and the themes came out of having all these different titles. I came up with, I think I have close to 500 titles.
Wow, that's some material.
And I would come up with the titles, and then they would gather the story. Like here's one called When Little Girls Come Out to Play.
Yeah.
Or one, Formerly Fat Louie, or Miracles in Wonder Bread. All Good Hoofers Go to Heaven. Don't Shoot Live Poets. The Big Sheep. Sidewalks of New York. Fine Lot of Lollipops. Death Rides a Fast Camel. That actually came from an Arab proverb. But none of these, I have the three Kimosabis. Okay? None of these, I had stories for them. I just would, let it set, and then I just sit down, and a story would come out, without even thinking. And that would happen time after time after time. So I wrote 50 of the film noirs, and then I did another 20, and now we're doing, I've been adapting them, and we're putting them on YouTube. Only for YouTube, it's called 4 Minute Film Noir, and I'm using some of the same actors for doing the videos.
And is this the first foray for ZBS into the realm of the visual as well? Because it's the first
Yeah,
I've
you
seen.
bet. I never done anything visual in my life. And so that's why the first season, as we call it, which is the first 6 of what we call 4 Minute Film Noir, because they were taking a bit longer to do as videos. And someone said, well, these are longer than 2 minutes. So I said, okay, we'll call it 4 minutes, even though they range generally around 3 minutes or something. I really needed to sort of see them first. So the first season is more or less 2 guys sitting in a bar talking, and there's like variations on that, but they're just are very much identical to the radio pieces. The next then gets much more visual, and some have some animation in it, like sort of graphic novel parts that will be coming out, and then we'll be getting into green screen with the next one, and so on. A few years ago, a friend of mine, I think it was Davia Nelson, she's part of what's called the Kitchen Sisters. They produce some really wonderful documentaries. She knew Francis Ford Coppola, and Coppola had told her that he was interested in doing radio drama, but he wanted to do it to work out the ideas for a film. And so his office called me, and we sent him out some stuff, and I never heard anything back, but I didn't expect, because he just wanted to hear what some people were doing. And I don't know if he ever did it or not, that is, where he would do it first as a radio drama and then do it as a film. But I realized that that was the perfect way to work. And with these little film noir pieces, I could work the dialogue out and sounds and everything, first for radio, and then, and then I'd be ready to go to do them as little short videos. So that's really based on an idea that came from him.
Now, getting the visual dimension as well, I mean, I would imagine that's either after having worked so long in audio-only forms of entertainment and forms of narrative, it's either got to be a fantastic new realm full of joyful possibilities or something that's kind of unpleasant after knowing what audio can do and then having to work with this other dimension that maybe would feel needless after you've been able to achieve so much only in audio. It's got to be, I guess you're maybe somewhere in the middle, or what?
Well, no, it's the first thing that you were saying about the fantastic possibilities. I think the Internet is in some ways closer to radio than television or film. And of course, it sounds absolutely crazy, but I think it's because people are trying to do television or film that is in terms of people that are creating series or serials, webisodes, as they call them, for the Internet. That to me it means anything that you can do visually can work on the Internet, and in some ways, because what I want to do is use the elements of radio. A lot of it is like sounds that I've recorded in Brazil and so on and so forth, but also to use qualities that are how to explain that are really that are still very studio based. So that we're apart from most of the things you see done are being done outside, so to speak, and moving, and the way we see film done, and so on and so forth. But to me, I like the artificiality of shooting in a studio because we're using a local PBS television station studio, and then you can create things that are kind of somewhere with a foot in radio and a foot in the visual, and and it's just figuring out. So it's great fun figuring it out because the joy is not knowing what you're doing. And that's and that was the thing with radio that was constantly difficult, in the sense that once I knew what I was doing, then it wouldn't be interesting, and I had to keep trying to something different to keep it interesting for me. So that's why this is so exciting, because I have no idea what I'm doing, and I am working with an old friend who's been he was part of ZBS in the early years, and he's directing, and so it's very much a collaboration, and so I am working with somebody that does have experience in this particular visual realm that I don't.
That remark of the joy of not knowing what you're doing, it echoes for me. You were talking about, I believe, on a podcast, doing some of the early shows where you said, I scripted a number of them, and we started recording those, and those were going out to stations while I still had to script the remainder of the show, and I still had to make the story. I didn't know where the characters were going to end up. It sounds like a working method that would freak some people out, but it really gets you fired up.
It does. There's nothing like a good deadline to keep you awake. I'll tell you. And I always used to joke that on my tombstone it would say, "He never missed a deadline, not even this." Just about every series I've done, which is like 13-week series, that sort of thing, has always been on the air while I'm still writing the last part. Because you got a 3-month thing, so it really keeps you awake. So sometimes with very little sleep. But that's the way they used to do radio, and they did it live, generally speaking. But often they were writing right up to the moment of going on live, and there's something about, you lose something, as you know, when you tape something. The energy is different than when something is live, and you can't. That's it. You can't do any editing with it later. It's going out. And so, in a sense, that helped having these desperate deadlines. It helped keep an edge.
Well, this hour has certainly gone by way too fast. For any of these productions we've talked about, they're at, of course, ZBS.org. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the program.
Well, it was fun.
This has been the Marketplace of Ideas. I've been Colin Marshall. At our website, colinmarshallradio.com, you'll find our complete interview archive, other podcasts, and more fun stuff. Our music is produced by Ben Althouse. If you go to his website, benalthouse.com, you'll see what he's up to. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.